Hello, everybody. This is Jeff Soriano from All for Pop. I would like to welcome all of you today to our virtual roundtable, The Age of the Consumer Content, and specifically talking about how visual UGC is impacting marketing, advertising, and commerce. So really happy to have everyone here today. This is a topic that's very important to us here at All for Pop, so glad that so many of you find it to be important as well. And we have some great panelists here today from M-Booth and 360i. So what I'd like to kind of do to get things started is, before we go into our content, just a little bit of housekeeping. So if you guys have any audio issues, this might be super obvious, but try turning up the volume on your computer, or if you're still having problems, try dialing in. You can see the dial information here, but it's also shown in your invite as well. If you guys do have any questions, we invite you guys to actually put them right into the chat box that's part of the webinar function that you guys see in your login panel on the right. And if you want to, you guys can actually do and contribute to the content today by using a hashtag #PopWebinar. And you guys can do that on Twitter. And we hope that you stay through the end, but if something comes up, don't worry about it. We are recording this, and we will be sending out a copy of it after we're all done. So the agenda for today is pretty simple. We're going to do a little intro, about 5 minutes, and then we're going to go into the Q&A, which is going to be the really good stuff. And then we want to leave about 5 minutes for you, the audience, to ask us any questions. So without further ado, let's kind of get into it here. So again, I think this is a pretty obvious statement, but I'll say it anyhow. The combination of cameras on smartphones, specifically front-facing cameras, and social media as a technology, both of these things have completely changed our lives. I can remember when taking a photo was kind of a rare thing that you did on the holidays or birthdays or other special occasions, and while that might be dating me, I think it's relevant for us to consider what taking a picture meant a long time ago and what it means now. You used to have to get those pictures developed, right? You had to actually take them somewhere, and then you'd go and pick them up when they were ready a couple days later, and then you put them into an album, which you would show to people who would reluctantly look at it when they came over to your house, right? And they'd just be like, oh God, he's showing me one of his photo albums. But that's completely shifted and changed, and it goes back to this whole evolution of the smartphone and social media, where we're taking tons of pictures every single day, and we're sharing them on all these different channels, and it's happening instantly. It's immediate gratification, and people love immediate gratification. So if we look at just some of these stats that are here, and I'm not going to read all of them to you, but the one that obviously stands out is like over 1.8 billion photos are being uploaded and shared every day. I mean, just think about that. That's billions and billions and billions of photos. But in addition to just creating that content, and sharing it, yeah, sharing it's really important. Well, people love consuming content, and specifically within these social channels. And I think that's really clear if you start to look at just how many active users these different platforms have. If you look at Facebook, it's crazy, 968 million daily active users. Instagram growing very rapidly with over 400 million. That number is probably way up even from when we looked at this. I think it's actually closer to 600 or 700. So it's crazy to think just how these platforms are growing. And the reason why this is really interesting and super important for marketers is this is where people are spending their time, especially millennials, and it's becoming a preferred channel for how they consume content, and specifically over other channels like traditional television, like things like TV. People are actually tuning in to content on their smartphones. Or even think about yourself when you're sitting there watching TV now. You're probably doing the dual monitor thing, right? Like your dual screen thing where you're looking at the TV, you have your phone, you might even have your laptop open. So you might have 3 different screens going. And this is a trend that we're all really aware of. But I would say that social as a channel, it's still something that we're all trying to master and really get our hands around. So years ago, or maybe even less, we looked at social as just another place to kind of push brand-produced content, and how we could just reach our audiences, right? So when organic reach was kind of taken away from brands, a lot of your clients, it was like, okay, well, what are we going to do? And specifically, when you start thinking about the content that's on these platforms, there's this whole thing around how much content's being produced and how much time people have to actually digest it. So if you just think about the pure amount of content being created every day by people, by brands, by news organizations, it's like, how can we possibly think that people can consume all of this? The reality is they're probably just swiping past so much of it. So when we start to look at what kinds of content people want to engage with, what we're seeing is that they're spending more time with user-generated content or consumer-produced content. And the rationale behind this is that it's really more of a peer-to-peer thing, and that's really, really interesting, right? Because it's like this is content being created by people for the people, and they're really, really enjoying it. So why? It begs the question, why are people so into this? And I think it's really because of a trust and authenticity factor that exists with UGC. It's crazy to say this, but right, like the selfie has changed marketing, and people are trusting content from their peers over what a brand might say because it's more authentic. It's just like, hey, listen, if you're looking at a product, it's the reason why we all go to reviews, right? And reviews are really interesting, but when you look at visual content, like visual UGC, it takes perception out of the review, and people really start to connect to it. And they're finding it more memorable, right? So when you look at something and say, oh, look at this brand-produced content, that's interesting. But then you start to look at that review or a picture somebody took of something, you start to really think about it, and it's ultimately starting to be something that you think about when you look at the product, whether you're in a store or you see it again online, and it's impacting purchasing decisions. So that authenticity, the relevance, the added perception or lack of context, UGC is really supporting all of these things and ultimately impacting the consumers. And what we're seeing is that this impact that UGC is having on consumers is ultimately driving impacts for brands, for your clients. And here at OfferPop, when we look at some of our own customers, which I assume some of you guys are using us, some of your brands are using us, some of your clients are using us, this is what they're seeing when UGC is within those campaigns. So it's driving more repeat visits on the website when there's UGC present because people have a reason to come back, right? It's not stale content all the time. It's new, fresh content. They're spending more time on the site because, like we said, the content is just more engaging to them. We're seeing lifts in social campaigns because people are not swiping right past that content. They're connecting to it, which ultimately is driving up click-through rates because they're very interested in what's sitting behind that UGC. So I won't go into all of these, but again, ultimately, UGC is driving some really amazing impacts for our customers. So I could sit here and talk about this all day, but to keep us on schedule and really get to the awesome part of the content here, what I would like to do is now move into our virtual roundtable and our Q&A. So what would be great is I'd actually like to have our panelists introduce themselves. So Amber, if you wouldn't mind just giving the audience a quick overview of yourself, your background, your experience, and that would be fantastic. So thank you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Amber, and I'm the Vice President of Digital at MBooth. And here at MBooth, I lead strategy for both digital and social for business, consumer, and lifestyle clients. And some of the brands that I work with that you've heard of, Mercedes-Benz, Brooks Running, who's one of my favorite clients to work with. They're so creative. Also, American Express. And through all of those experiences, I'm excited to kind of share some examples with you guys today.
Thanks, Amber, and thank you for joining us today. Fitz, it'd be great to
Hey,
hear from you.
yeah. Hi, I'm Fitz Marrow. I'm an innovation strategist here at 360i. Previous to that, I had doing brand strategy here for 3 years. I was at Goodby Silverstein and Partners before that, and a while back I got my master's in creative technology from the VCU Brand Center. I work on a lot of different clients here at 360i. I guess notable ones that we've been doing a lot of work recently with Oreo, HBO, Target, Canon Photography, and a variety of other smaller clients. But yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this and the opportunities that brands have to leverage UGC, not just from a repurposing standpoint, but also, an insights and data perspective of what type of learnings we can get from that type of content.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So let's do it. Let's jump on in. Let's get to the questions. So, Amber, I'm going to start with you. We've been talking about how consumers are producing a lot of content, whether it's selfies or gramming their favorite moments, whatever it is. But this consumer behavior is really starting to impact marketing strategies. And I was just curious if we could just kind of start with a kind of a broader, how are you seeing UGC and consumer-produced content impacting your own strategies and the clients that you work with strategies?
Sure. Yeah, it not only impacts strategy, Jeff, but I feel like it also impacts our planning process. One of the ways that it impacts strategy is that, we are taking into consideration that the lifespan of our social content is just growing shorter and shorter. We also are seeing that the content we create is not getting as much visibility unless we put paid dollars behind it. For our planning process, we need to be able to pivot more quickly. So we are, a few years ago we were planning a full, year ahead in some cases for certain clients. What I'm seeing lately is we're really creating, yes, a full year's plan outline, but we need to be able to make adjustments each quarter. And we're often not creating some of the, visual content until a few months before it going live, so that we make sure that we use the latest technologies, so that we make sure we tie into any relevant trends that may be happening. So all of those things are things that we're taking into consideration as marketers these days. The other piece I feel like that is important to note that consumers also are more easily recognizing ads and branded content. They know when they're being marketed to. You guys all know that, and you feel a little bit differently about marketing content. I mean, it's not always something you can quite put your finger on, but I know from personal experiences I can. But also, and this is something that one of my coworkers actually says from time to time, but there's that Kardashian effect that we have to kind of take into consideration, to where we're seeing these people, tons of influencers, and the influencer community is growing and growing and growing, who are creating and setting the stage for the type of UGC that people are putting on a pedestal a little bit. And so that challenges brands to sort of either mimic it, to make better content, to utilize, and form relationships with those influencers. So all of those things are impacting our thinking right now in this area.
So that's really interesting. So 2 points of interest. One, I can't believe we have something called the Kardashian effect now. But secondly, you're talking more about planning, right? So, Fitz, as we talk about planning specifically, I think that there is a bit of a perception out there sometimes that UGC might not be the best quality, or it might not be the best content. When you think about planning, how do you, what are some best practices to drive really good, high quality UGC? How do you plan before you launch to support the creation of really great UGC?
Yeah, so I think there's a variety of ways that you can go about, trying to bring in the best quality content. First and foremost, I think incentives are awesome. We talked a little bit about influencer marketing, as Amber just had noted. So, if we're going to be working with influencers, definitely incentivize them. I think if they're super fans, kind of a smaller niche group of people who really are passionate about a specific vertical that you're going after, with maybe a couple thousand followers, but not hundreds of thousands, then giving them really unique experiences tends to lend itself really nicely to that type of passion point. But if we're talking to just general UGC, in addition to incentives, maybe a coupon or something like that, I think just a really nice, clear call to action can go a long way. You know, show us your experience when you're out with your families during the holidays. It's a very specific, but also not overly crazy call to action, and I think that can lend itself really nicely. We've seen a lot of campaigns. 360i has been doing social for a long time now, and part of that evolution came with starting to see UGC and then trying to harness UGC, and now we're trying to generate the best UGC. And I think between incentives and a nice, strong, clear CTA, you can really put yourself as in the best position possible as a brand trying to get that type of content.
So Fitz, just to kind of follow up on that, you mentioned the holidays, right? Like something like that. So it sounds like, and would love to hear your thought on this. It's almost less about connecting maybe on a product, but more trying to find something that's going to evoke emotion or something that people are passionate about, something that will help drive the right kind of UGC. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I really believe that we're talking to people out there, and we can't always just keep calling them consumers. And I think sometimes we can get in the weeds of that. But when you get down to it, people are feeling machines that think. We're not thinking machines that feel. We're at first, at our most primal level, we like to feel things. And when you can connect with an emotional level like that, I think that's really your best opportunity to position yourselves as a brand that's not only there that they can connect with, but also not overly trying to hijack their world. Just being a relevant partner and owning a relevant space. Maybe it's not specifically your product, but it's tangential, and it's not a long logical leap for you to try to own a space like that.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, I like the way you're thinking, about thinking and all. We are people, right? So it's interesting as people that we're finding this UGC to be very relevant to us. So, Amber, as we look at that specifically, what value does the consumer-produced content potentially provide that the brand-produced content might not be able to? And I'm not saying brand-produced content is bad, but just curious what you think the value of UGC is that brand-produced content might not be able to provide.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned earlier, I think authenticity is at the top of that list. For Brooks Running, we like to talk about the runner's perspective, and when we're doing our planning, we always like to think about, well, what's the runner's perspective here? And that applies to any brand. You want to think about the consumer's perspective, and UGC is one of the best ways to kind of explore that. And if you're really using clear calls to action in the type of UGC that you're trying to gather, the value can be really great. Some of the things that I've seen is that UGC, not only are you gathering imagery and potentially video, but those come with these amazing personal stories, and those often provide a level of nuance and context to a brand story, and it provides a real-time example as well. For some of the UGC campaigns that I've been working on over the past few months, we've actually seen that when asked really specific questions, like Fitz said, people are emotional, and when you're talking to them about something that they're passionate about and inviting them to share it, you often will get a longer form text response, and that conversation then amongst people who see the UGC, they have this ability to then connect with other people who have the same interests. So when you're a brand, you can sometimes do that with influencers or spokespeople on your behalf, but it's really hard to do that as just that brand voice itself. The other thing that it really does, I feel, is UGC helps drive affinity and awareness in a way beyond what you can do with your brand channels. So that awareness also puts it into, makes the product seem more approachable, and when people see it, it makes them feel like, oh, well, it's part of that person's lifestyle who I know. It could be a part of my lifestyle too. So, I think the value is huge.
That's interesting, right? Because a couple of words we heard there around like context, affinity, these are really important aspects of what you're trying to get back from a lot of your marketing initiatives. And I kind of want to take the word affinity and sculpt it in a different way to Fitz, to kind of go back to something you said in the beginning around using UGC not only like in your marketing, but from a data perspective. As we go into 2016, tell me a little bit more about how you're thinking about that, right? Like, how is it more than just leveraging UGC, the actual content, but leveraging it, maybe to understand a consumer's affinity or people's affinity? Maybe you could dive a little bit into that.
Yeah, I think this parallels what Amber was noting about the runner's mindset. And sometimes as marketers, we can kind of get stuck in these ruts of overly doing research and digging into decks, poring over statistics, when you could really just jump online and do a quick search of hashtags and start to see how are people using this product, in what context are they using it, what are the words they're using to describe it. And while you can automate a lot of that with tools out there, we take a lot of pride at 360i in making sure that we have an insights and research department that uses a lot of manual, culling of this information. So we learned a lot of interesting things. Historically, I think one of our bigger wins through something like that was with Oreo, who we had seen a fan post him dunking a cookie with a fork so that he didn't get his fingers milky. And then we started to dig into that, and we thought, well, that's kind of interesting. He's playing with his food, and we thought that's very funny. Millennials are starting to play with their food in a way that you're always told not to. And we started to see more and more of this content as we promoted that and repurposed it and reached out to him and made sure we got his good graces. We actually started to see so much traction that we developed a whole campaign around playing with your food and doing something unique with it. We called it Oreo Snack Hacks, and that was a really big win for the brand because it was tapping into existing behaviors that fans had, and from a social perspective, we were able to observe that behavior and then take action on it in a really kind of positive way for both the brand and the consumers, because again, it was happening. So I think just learning about how they're using it, context is so much of what UGC provides from a data side. But again, it's not going to be coming from automated software, although AI and machine learning will be taking us in there in the future. I think right now it's just a really great way for planners and strategists to get a quick understanding of the product and how it's being used, and the types of experiences people are using it in.
So that's really interesting, right? So you're essentially using, it's almost like you're using it as a focus group, right? Like you're seeing what people are doing and saying, hey, rather than trying to create behavior, let's actually look at what consumers, or let's stop calling them consumers, let's call it what people are doing, and leveraging that information to make smart decisions as a brand, and informing your clients as well as what to do. So that's super interesting. I'm sorry, go ahead, Fitz.
I think it's just it's maybe even better than a focus group in sometimes, because when you sit in those focus groups, for those of us who have done that, you kind of understand that sometimes people feed you what they think you want to hear, whereas social content is really just a pure, more unfiltered version. So I think there's pluses and minuses to both, but social provides a really kind of unfiltered lens to that.
Yeah, it's true. It's a really good point of view. I'm going to make a little bit of a shift here, kind of with our next question, and go back to something, Amber, you said a little bit earlier around this idea that we're starting to have to put dollars behind things, right? And we don't have that organic reach anymore necessarily. So a lot of the social networks have started to develop commerce capabilities. Obviously, there's advertising capabilities. How are you starting to think about those channels now? Because they used to just kind of be about awareness, but now they can be about conversions. How are you looking at it differently? How do you plan on using it in the future? And how do you think UGC kind of ties into that? So kind of a broad question, but Amber would just kind of like to get your thoughts on the shift of how the social channels have changed and how that's changed your planning.
Yeah, so in regards to commerce, I mean, one of the ways that we're already seeing UGC be successful is, integration on our clients' websites, whether it's on a product page to where it really just helps show different people using the products in different ways, or just, how that product fits into their lifestyle. That's actually led to, site visit duration increasing. because people just like to kind of click through. It's sort of that, I feel like UGC is almost that new rating and review, right? Picture tells 1,000 words, and we don't often want to take the time to read through a bunch of reviews, but if we can look through some different photos, that helps inform our decision, our purchase decision. And I think the same thing applies to our social channels. So I saw an article just yesterday actually about how the fashion industry, especially high-end fashion, was seeing a huge lift because people's consideration was coming from social media, and that was really becoming more and more of a reason why they buy. I think one, it's with certain categories, UGC in particular with influencers can show aspiration, and it makes us see that product, other people have it, we want it, so what better place than on social than to consider how to do this better.
So this all goes and ties back to that, like you said, the visual review, right? It's just much easier to almost take in and digest because perception again is taken out. You can really see the product. So the value of UGC is so high, which ultimately leads us back to what kind of the next question is about, and that's getting consent for UGC or rights management. Because it's an important topic, right? And I think we all saw where Crocs kind of ran into some issues where they didn't necessarily maybe have the right consent. Fitz, it would be kind of good to hear from you what your thoughts around rights management or getting consent. Like, what are some of the best practices there? What have you seen be successful? Because we obviously want to get this UGC. So how do you see that playing into what you're doing with your clients?
Yeah, so I mean, I think if we bucket them in influencers and that type of UGC, and then we bucket them into organic appearing content, we can kind of take two different routes. Predominantly what we do here is we make sure we have a full contract fleshed out, looked at by Corp Common Legal, that given to influencers. And then when it comes to more organic stuff, that's something that's kind of platform specific. I find that we've had our best success when we actually get someone to not just DM us back or comment back, because those can be infallible, or those are fallible, I apologize. So yeah, we find that, ideally, if the opportunity presents itself, we make sure that someone can either go to a microsite, check a box, and grant us authorization, or get it in writing through email. But that is something that every agency right now is trying to discover what is the best way to do it. And as platforms add new features, that changes. When Instagram added the direct message feature, that became a better opportunity for our community managers to quickly jump on, get in touch with someone without having to kind of spam their page with comments, and then get authorization that way. So I think it's something that is ever changing. But with influencers, definitely a contract. With social organic stuff, it's a little bit different. But at the end of the day, that is very much on the agency's side of things to make sure that we have buttoned up, because as you said, there are some lawsuits that are already popping up, and I think any big agency who isn't doing that due diligence is really just setting themselves up for a lot of legal implications. So make sure you get that sign off in whatever manner and try to make it as airtight as possible.
Makes perfect sense, and it does seem like you want to really ensure that you're doing everything possible to make sure that it is infallible, right? And that it's not just something where you kind of go lowest level of barrier entry and then get yourself into some trouble. So perfect. Well, listen, guys, I want to be conscious of time, so I would like to move into some of the audience questions because we are starting to run a little over. So there was an audience question that came in around for younger brands who are kind of just starting out. How do you use or suggest they use UGC? How do you create brand identity while favoring UGC? So maybe Amber, maybe you could answer that.
Sure. Yeah. For brands then that are just trying to keep a consistent identity, one of the things that you can do is, it also depends how much UGC do you have to work with. Do you have thousands of submissions that people are sharing? You might just have a few. If you just have a few, obviously once getting the rights to use that UGC, there are different ways you can do it. Just one example that we did this summer with a client, we had a UGC campaign, and we were inviting people to just share a photo, and it was actually a surprise and delight campaign. And so when they shared their photo, we had a design team on hand. It was a one-day campaign, and so we had a few graphic designers and illustrators who added a bit of fun flair to each of the images. So we looked at the story in the image, or that accompanied the image, and we added some illustration on top of their photograph and kind of replied by surprising them with it. And so we didn't, share a ton of images that day. It was more like 20 in real time, but it allowed us to, add our own sort of branded element, no logos or anything like that, but it tied in with the campaign. So that was just one fun way. But other ways would be, once you have the approval, oftentimes you're getting the rights to, if you include it in your form that people submit, you could maybe getting the rights to alter the image. So you could consider adding a filter or creating a gallery based on images that have a similar theme. So all things to consider when you're uploading them. But I always suggest attribution and being very clear that that image is UGC. People love to see that their photo was used on a brand channel and that they were acknowledged for it and given credit. And two, it tells the brand's followers that this isn't our branded content, but we want to share something with you that's just really authentic and that we felt was representative of our brand.
That actually leads kind of well into another audience question, and we'll kind of have to make this our last one just because of time. But someone asked, how do you feel about branding that just mimics the look of UGC? Does this work? Is it effective? Fitz, your thoughts on that?
That's an interesting question. So I guess that's a two-sided answer for me. One is that if that is in fact how people are sharing your brand, then I think it's totally, it totally makes sense to lend your type of style to that. With the caveat that you keep it clean and polished and make sure that it doesn't have any, low quality feeling to it. As much as we have hopes that UGC is generally as high as quality as our stuff, it just isn't. So I don't think, taking cues from your fans and how they're using that product or service is a bad thing. I think on the other side of things is that, you have the opportunity to really inform your community as towards the type of style that you're looking for. So if you just cowtail to theirs, then you're letting them dictate the experience a little bit more than I think a lot of brands are comfortable doing. And while we should relinquish some control to them, and exactly how that plays out, I think it's probably a better bet to stick with the style that you think represents your brand best, maybe taking some cues from their types of content, but that also will inform down the road, the types of content you'll be seeing from future fans. So again, I think it's great if you can, pull some types of learnings from that. Definitely would not shy away from being as authentic as you can with the types of content you're seeing, but at the same time, don't, give your brand up to the masses, because you also want to be able to shape that down the road. And if you don't start from a point where you're in a little bit more control, I think you can get yourself into some hot water down the road.
Awesome. Well, guys, again, I want to be respectful of time, and we have gone a little bit over. So I would like to thank Fitz and Amber today for joining us. This has been an awesome conversation. I hope everybody found it super valuable. And, we'll be sending out an on-demand version, so guys, keep your eyes open for that. As well as keep your eyes open for some more of the webinars that we'll be doing, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, guys. Have a good afternoon.
Bye.